Hi, thank you for coming. It's so nice to show in a small theater with a nice audience. This is a selection of some earlier work. I started with puppet animation, and through a recent piece, very recent piece, the first thing that you'll see that I'm still working on. And we can talk afterwards. So thanks. And thank you to Adam and Mark Toscano for bringing me to LA.
Karen Yasinsky. We're just talk about your films right after seeing them. That came up before the show. I'll do a few, and then we'll see if anybody else has some thoughts. So let's start with the earlier ones. Do you remember, like, your original reason for desiring to investigate Balthazar?
Yeah, the obvious reason. Maybe not everyone knows the film Hazard Balthazar by Robert Bresson, and he's known for using actors as models. And and aside from that, he's one of my absolute favorite directors, and a lot of it has to do with how he builds ideas, and he doesn't quite build emotions. He presents actions and consequences without judgment, and he works with fragments of action and a lot of hands and overdetermined sound effects. So they're not really realistic sound effects, but all this stuff that I really love. And he uses actors as models, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to use real puppets. So the first idea was to why O Hazard Balthazar was a really problematic film for me, and it's like deep, heavy sadness and almost pessimism, and I think he's trying to see he's trying to explore if there is grace or redemption. I think there were a series of films that he was working with, and I saw it twice in 1 week, and was devastated both times, but I also felt really uplifted by the artistry and the fact that somebody made this incredible film. So it was like those two things. So that's when I decided to do it. And I did the puppet animation, and it took a long time to figure out how to end it. And then I'm like, I don't want to deal with narrative anymore and somebody else's narrative. So that's when I did the Enough to Drive You Mad, because I thought just pure automatism. I'll do whatever pops into my head. And then the last one, Marie, I still wasn't through with O Hazard Balthazar, or the character of Marie. So I wanted to do something where the emotion maybe came from playing with the sound and more like physical, violent disruptions of the image. And then I had to come up with an ending, and that's the ending I came up with. Which is from a really wonderful film, The Saga of Ghost of Berlin, a silent film.
It's really it's this ongoing thing in your films, and again, it's like the thing that's I would say almost is like, I would imagine is almost impossible to discuss, but maybe not. It's like these. I find in your films a really remarkable ongoing set of juxtapositions within one film. Like, our normal way of viewing a film will take us on one journey, and you cut to something else, which is, to me, very disjointed and yet always seems very right. So this is one of the ongoing responses. So perhaps the question would be how do you arrange your mental process to be open to finding these disjunctive or other sources of imagery that then you find to be able to place together that do interesting things for you?
It's like, for me, it's I don't like to write stories. I love narrative and I love stories. So it's like, for me, it's really hard to write something. And so it's really easy just to take these images and sounds, songs that I really love. And we were talking a little bit about this last night. Since my work is mediated, I'm not working with real life. I'm working with other filmmakers' images and ideas and songs and books. I kind of have, like, over a period of time, I have all this stuff that is obsessing me or troubling me or exciting me, and those are the things that get into the film. And if it's a surrealist sort of structure, and it's just, instead of not letting things in because they don't fit, like letting all this stuff in. So for me, it's like, it's sort of natural. But I can't. I wish I could do like a great feature narrative, but I can't.
Well, we got enough of those. Well, you're talking about the sound, of course, and I mean, one thing in the way, whether it's just as it's played tonight, I mean, your sound is very deliberate and it's very restrained all the way through, to me. And I didn't even know, like, was everybody in the back able to like hear things, because it was very restrained and quiet.
And it was a little, I should have turned it up because of the sound.
And we got a lot more,
Yeah.
between that and a lot more bodies probably when you did the sound check earlier today.
Yeah.
But tell me the way you think in which sound works in your film.
Love to. I think a lot about sound, and I think of sound, and not so much in my, like in the puppet animation, I worked with somebody, the same person who would compose music, and I would give him the finished picture cut and he would compose music, which I thought worked really well. I was really happy with it. But then when I stopped working with narratives, even though the puppet animation, it's narratives where nothing happens, I started to think of sound as an image. So I don't want the sound to repeat or repeat what we're already seeing. So if the sound is more present and more, I don't know, interesting, rather than, well, I guess all the sounds, they come from another place, so they have references with them in the same way that the images have references. And when they're used to change or talk to that image in some way. That's what I think about sound.
Can you talk specifically about, there's a lot of moments where the image it's like the screen is blank or black, or not that that's not an image, and it's hard to tell where sometimes the film ends and the next one begins.
Yeah.
And there's sound in those sections quite often.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those sections in particular?
Yeah, it's more of a transition, like watching, because I had screenings 2 days ago, so watching some of these films a couple of times with an audience, because it's always different when you watch with an audience. They're slow, and I think of Peter Kubelka was the one who talked about sound, the kind of sound that we live with, like the film projector going click, 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 the footsteps, a heartbeat. So I do think of these, like there's always sound, and sometimes you want to close your eyes, sometimes you have a break, but there's always sound, I think. And I guess there's always images even if you close your eyes.
Well, the sound then has a lot of the effect of creating space.
Yes. Yes.
I really felt that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because I was self-conscious. I've been self-conscious about space ever since I started making movies, because with the puppet animation, it's such a shallow space and there wasn't a lot of visual information. And I came from a painting background, and I hated dealing with space. So then I thought, if I'm working with even found footage as an object, it is flat. There is no space. So that's the sound needs to help. Yeah, thank you.
Since we just started, more thoughts or questions from any of you yet as well?
I was hoping you could talk a little bit about tactility and touch because it's a hugely important thing in your work.
Yeah.
And I think even as it's manifested in the process and the techniques too. Because, and maybe, I don't know if everybody realizes this, but I mean, all the animation techniques you're using are all very, very manual, done by hand, including the kind of intense pixelated, like an audition at the end.
Yeah.
Didn't you say each frame of that took 8 days or something to go?
Yeah.
So it's like that, but we're kind of aware of the physicality and the tactility of it, which is then connected to a lot of the pervasive tactility of the films. And I was just wondering, the content. I was wondering if you could talk about the importance of that.
Sure, yeah. When I painted, I went to this really kind of old-fashioned school when I started painting called the Studio School in New York, and we worked from the model, and I remember getting really excited about finding the form, and like finding the form with your eyeball. And I think this is what Cubism was about too, and a lot of painting, like touching with your eyeball and not knowing what you're painting, but just like the sense of finding, touching. Yeah, again, something, well, I say again, it's in my head, something without language. So then when I started to do puppet animation, the reason why I did it is because I wanted to make films, but I didn't want to work with people, and I didn't know anything about animation, but I just thought it'll be simple to make my own actors, and they won't talk back to me or say anything. And then when I was making them, it's a very, and I'd done sculpture before, but I like to be quiet and use my hands. So when I started to animate them, I don't push this on my animation students, but I always want to. Like, I love animating really slowly. And it has to do with, it takes a really long time for like two characters to come together. And while that's happening, you are the characters, you are the director, you are everything. And so you can think of all the things that could happen. And it really is a process of like, oh, I don't want that reading, I don't want that reading. But your hands are on them the whole time. And your hands, it's sort of like everything's in a different time zone. So these little touches to make the puppets move, the animation models move, are creating sort of their thoughts. It's a really cool process. And so that, so that's something to do with touch. Yeah, and the drawing, I love to draw. And when I started to do drawing animation, and I didn't show this movie, but it was a movie from the film La Talente, and I decided I was going to remake the beginning of the film, but as a hand-drawn cartoon, and I would redraw every line instead of using cells, and then the wiggling line would be so like conceptually weird. And I had this idea that it was really going to be some subject matter, and then when I had it shot, it was just the beginning of La Talente as a cartoon form that just stopped. But I realized, even though it didn't have this conceptual power that I thought it would have, I really love the process, because it's something about, and again, it's touch, because you make a mark and you're copying something and it's never the same. And so it's this very subtle thing that has to do with your hand and eye. And I think maybe people that play video games understand that, which I don't, or skeet shooting, which I tried once and I was really bad at it. But
What about skee ball? No.
skee ball, no.
One more step on that. Where is like the question just left me for a moment. How did you come to, like, in your puppet, I'll just do this one separately. For the puppets, how did you, like, decide or how you wanted them to look? What did you want from them?
I wanted them all to look accepting. And since their faces aren't moving at all, like pleasant and kind of accepting and kind of blank. Yeah. And that was about it. And that was another reason I stopped puppet animation, because I'm like, oh, they're all kind of looking the same, and I felt like I was making the same movie again and again.
But the tactility of their bodies and their costumes is really powerful. The way that it magnifies every touch they do to each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, they have those lumpy hands.
Yeah. And so you can almost feel them touching each other and what those fabrics feel like. And so there's a tentative awkwardness to their touch that's very human. Yeah. You know, which the characters are tentative.
Yeah. And a lot of working with these figures, like, I find out my subject matter in the process. Like, I have one idea, which is pretty simple to start with. And with the puppet animations, it really did become the awkwardness of being in a body, and the inability for these bodies, or whatever's inside the body, to truly connect.
Please?
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the footage that's in China and Japan? Because in the whole body's work, all the other footage or material, you did some treatment to it. But these two, I feel like they're really raw. I feel like you're just going through them and looking at it in like that way. So, can you say?
Sure, yeah. In the last one, Audition, I had done the drawing animation, and I only had 40 frames. It's like, and it was part of an art installation with this, or art, like what was it? It was a video and an art show. And it was like eye candy. It didn't really do anything. So I thought, I need some other part to this to turn it into something. And then I went back, and it's rotoscoped from a scene from Cassavetes' film Killing of a Chinese Bookie, where the stripper's walking across the stage. And I remembered the scene as like, and it took so long, so I hadn't even watched it. It took I wasn't working on it all the time, so it took at least 2 years. But then I sort of lost not lost my connection to it, but I went back to the film and realized, like, it's not the image that stayed with me, or the memory that stayed with me. It was the song. And it's by Bo Harwood, who did all of Cassavetes' music and sound, and his work is amazing. And at the same time, and this is what I mean when it's like, what's in my room? I was working on a video for a musical production of the Kafka Fragments, which is, does anybody know it? By Kurtag. It's really great, and it's really wrenching. But the director who was putting it together reimagined the character of Kafka as the first Japanese woman to climb Mount Everest. So I was trying to think of what imagery to use. So I had all these books of Japanese photographs, and then in looking through some of them, this song, they just went together. So it was something, whatever, and I can't say, but whatever the song brought out in me and connected me to it, I found also in those photographs. And the Chinese slideshow was my father's. He went to China with Nixon, and so this slideshow is a big part of my childhood, and slideshows in general. So that's a tough film, and I think it was maybe the start of when I just started putting things together. And this might sound wrong or arrogant, but it's like I'm gonna put these things together because I want to. There's no, they're not like, they're not commenting on each other in any metaphorical way. So that movie in particular, the first scene, the really violent scene was about a friend, like it came from a friend of mine was severely beaten up for no reason at all. And violence has always been something that I think a lot because it's something it's a big part of being human in our culture. And so I was trying to, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I think that's when I think, oh, I should do something in my work about it to sort of get it out. And going back to puppet animation, because I thought, should I get actors to do something? So the idea was to have that, and then have this slideshow, and then have this meditative thing at the end, which ended up getting cut out, and then the dancer got in there. But it was that slideshow, going back to it, it fascinates me in the same way that these other fragments fascinate me.
Well, as a quick first, what was your father doing in China with Nixon? He was a White House Fellow, which was this fellowship program where youngish people that might be promising in business would work in the government and get experience in the government. And the year that my dad did that, it happened that Nixon was going to China, so they took them. And he was with Colin Powell.
Huh?
And then, but just going one more step, because I think it is sort of interesting whether there's some sort of romantic or nostalgic element then that these two photo sets from Asia should be the two things in this whole body of work that don't have, apparent mediation from you. I don't know if you might have any additional thoughts about that as well. Yeah.
Well, I think like my dad's in the slideshow.
I thought
and so is Mr. Nogales. You don't know who he is. And it was like that, it was a part of that. I feel like it is part of me because it was part of what I grew up with. And those images as well. In the same way that the ballet dancer is from a scene from Kira Mirotova. The film, is it Chekhov's Sisters? Does anyone know that film? There was a program of her work at Rotterdam, and does anybody know her?
No, I've heard.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. She was like a true experimental person who just kept pushing herself. And it's, that ballet dancer is on a little TV set, and the family's yelling at each other, and they're all sitting TV style. And then the TV turns on, and they all get quiet and just watch. And they watch. And Ozu is also a favorite filmmaker of mine, and there's always the respect towards the other art that's presented in the film. And so they just sit and watch the ballet dancer and stop arguing. And so that's why I also wanted to have the whole dance, as well as that yodeling song in Life is an Opinion, Fire a Fact. I heard that song and thought I had to use it, and had it around for a while, but I couldn't cut it anywhere because I wanted to play it through. So, yeah.
In the back there, yes.
I find it interesting that a lot of the films sourced were these auteur masculine films, like Cassavetes or Bresson, etc. And so much time is meditated on those films in particular. The Cassavetes, that scene is troubling for me as well. I really like that scene too, but Could you talk about like your relationship to those films in that way?
Yeah. I mean, they're films that I love. The Cassavetes film, I was living in Rome, and I saw it there. And when I first saw all of Cassavetes, it was when I was visiting Paris, and they were showing, I think it's when Gérard Depardieu got rights to the films, and they were showing everywhere. And maybe so there's something for Cassavetes about that, something for me about Cassavetes, since I discovered him in another country and then watched Killing of a Chinese Bookie again in another country, felt so American, like so very American. And that, especially when I was in Rome, it filled me with this nostalgia for American stuff and maybe macho stuff. But Italy is pretty macho. Yeah, and yeah, they're filmmakers that I love. And the kinds of films that like somebody asked me before, like, don't you like any comedies? And I do, but I think the stuff that's in my work is the stuff that kind of does trouble me a little in many ways.
Mediations on Groundhog Day? No.
Hey, I love that. I do love that.
The way this was sequenced tonight from the past to the present, at first I haven't known your work, so at first I thought you have a background in either like experimental theater or dance, because of your idiosyncratic ways your people moved. And then, so that's one thing. And then Jim Fletcher appears, so there's that.
Do you know him?
Yeah.
Are you from New York?
Yeah.
So
he's so good.
But a second thing was in the sequencing tonight, very touching. There's a quality of kind of being jettisoned away from the material world or the physical. It's quite nice.
These are comments on the sequencing of tonight's show. I'll do the second of.
Notoriously quiet. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's also, you're facing this way. So two thoughts. One was the way the sequence worked was it gave a feeling of being jettisoned from the physical world, and another attribute of the evening for him was that it seemed he was inquiring about. It felt to him as though she perhaps had a background in experimental theater or dance in some ways.
I wish.
Responses to either of
I
those.
really wish. I took a ballet class when I was a little kid, and I fell asleep at the bar, so I was out. But I've never,
I've fallen asleep at the bar many times.
But no, I wish. And Jim Fletcher, how did I find him?
Oh, and Jim Fletcher is in. Please tell us who Jim Fletcher is.
He's like my muse. His voice. He's an actor, a New York actor who does a lot of experimental theater, and I don't know if my sound person Quentin Ciaupetto worked with him, and Laura Parnes, a friend, has worked with him, and I was trying to find a voice, and somebody mentioned him, and I looked him up, and it was the perfect voice. So, but maybe we were talking about this on Wednesday with students. Like sometimes when you're an artist, especially in political times like now, and I don't do political, I mean, I think all work is political, but I'm not dealing with issues that are really important right now, overtly. You just feel like you're in your own little bubble, cutting out the world. But we all have our personalities, and that's who I am. And it is, and I think that relates to wanting to do animation, or needing to do animation instead of working with people.
He also mentioned in the back, he was referencing, or you referenced as well tonight, just your love of Bresson and Ozu, which of course is the Paul Schrader text on the transcendental in film, and Bresson and Ozu. But I was just curious about your response to the idea of either pursuing the transcendental in films, or whether you feel there's a space where you're commenting on the possibility or difficulty thereof of achieving the transcendental in film.
Good question. I don't think about it like I'm trying to get you all to transcend something, but I know I really love it in other works. Yeah, and it is like this kind of work. It's when is it done? Like when do I stop? And it's usually finding a good ending. But now it's harder. Like I feel like why stop? And since it's fragment related, just try and keep building. But then, and ambition, like, oh, you want to submit it to film festivals, but that's sort of dropping away. Or it's just like time's changing. Even though I'm getting older and time's shorter, I almost feel like it doesn't matter anymore. Like there's not a rush, which, like, yeah, I know filmmakers that think differently, but yeah. And it's so much about the process and how I really enjoy what I do every day, and I wake up and there's so much work to be done, and that's a good way to live.
With that, any other last questions for a group, or Karen's still here for a one-on-one? But anyone?
Okay.
Well, thank you very much,
Yeah,
Karen,
and
for
thank you
sharing
all
your
so much.